All right. And let me read Professor Steckel's bio. So Suki Steckel is an assistant professor of practice with the University of Tennessee, Knoxville College of Social Work, where she specializes in courses related to neurophysiology and human development, evidence-based practice with children and adolescents, social welfare policy, and leadership and management. Prior to joining UT, she worked for the state of Tennessee for over 15 years in a variety of capacities, most recently serving as the Children's Mental Health and Systems of Care Director for the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. Ms. Steckel's macro specialties areas include children's mental health policy, interagency collaboration, leadership development, organizational management, curriculum development, and grant writing and management. She is passionate about applying adverse childhood experiences research to practice, trauma-informed care, and systems change. Ms. Steckel earned her master's in social work from UT and has served several terms on the board of the National Association of Social Workers, Tennessee's chapter, and is the co-founder of the Tennessee chapter of the Network for Social Work Management. So, Suki, we are so excited that you are here, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. And so I know that we have very little time together. And for anyone who happens to be on the webinar and knows me, you know that I get really excited about this subject matter, and I could be very long-winded. So I am relying on Jen to help us move seamlessly through this kind of mountain of information that I have prepared for you all today. But just know that you will get a copy of these slides after the presentation, and I really look forward to your questions and your participation. So without further ado, let's get started. As Jen mentioned, she read my bio, so that's me. I will be our tour guide for today. But I could not be here sitting with you today talking about this information if I was not standing on the shoulders of the giants who helped to prepare this work over really the last 5 years. And so I just really wanted to acknowledge the 8th Nashville Trauma-Informed Care Work Group, which you will hear about the college's collaboration with them later, and specifically Alex Batson, Lori Myers, and Adrian Mathern, who were kind of major architects of the Roadmap to Resilience. Dr. Lauren Brown is my colleague on the research study around organizational trauma resilience, which we will also talk about. And then, of course, we've had 2 rounds of Building Strong Brains funding from the Department of Children's Services that helped contribute to this work. And I'm very much looking forward to partnering with the University of Tennessee Social Work Office of Research and Public Service, also known as SWORPS, many of you may have heard of, and they're hopefully going to be one of our evaluation partners moving forward. A little bit about what we're going to cover today is just a very brief history of trauma-informed care, so we're all on the same page. I know we all come to this work from different areas. I will not spend a whole lot of time there, but wanted to make sure that we touch base on that. We'll review Resilient Tennessee and the Roadmap to Resilience. We'll talk briefly about some new research on assessing fidelity to trauma-informed care principles, something that is really important, and as well, if we have time, the 5 dimensions of organizational trauma resilience. And lastly, I want to identify some next steps for you all and kind of mapping your journey. So if you are interested in engaging with the Roadmap to Resilience, or just looking into implementing trauma-informed care within your organization, I just have a few little things for you all to be thinking about. And then, of course, we'll hopefully have time for question and answers. So jumping right into it. The big thing to remember with trauma-informed care is that it really is an umbrella term. It's a catch-all phrase for organizational operating paradigms. So there are so many pieces that are rolled up into TIC. So I know we kind of throw that term around a lot, perhaps, but it really is about how are you operating the business, and especially around the business of serving vulnerable populations. And so we want to make sure that those operating paradigms recognize and respond to the deleterious health outcomes associated with psychological traumatization. So it really is, when you think about it, just know that it really is an umbrella term. It's built on a lot of the work. I will just highlight Sandra Bloom, and her seminal work around creating sanctuary and developing the sanctuary model, which to this day remains proprietary. Then, since then, efforts have ensued to increase the accessibility of implementation of trauma-informed care in a lot of different ways. We've had states, we've had organizations, we've had small agencies, large agencies. It's really, people have kind of taken the ball and just really run with it. And unfortunately, in 2014, SAMHSA came out with TIP 57, which is a treatment improvement protocol for trauma-informed care and behavioral health services. And I do want to point out that these, when you really look at Bloom's work combined with the TIP 57, which is over 300 pages of information, that really does kind of create the cornerstones of when we talk about trauma-informed care today. Both of these seminal works are based on operating in behavioral health settings. So I just want to acknowledge that. The TIP 57 protocol serves as a guide for adoption of TIC principles and even identifies those principles. And again, SAMHSA talks about TIC as referring to a paradigm in which health or behavioral health entities realize, recognize, respond to, and work to resist further traumatizing individuals. And they do that through these 6 principles. And I wanted to highlight that the piece around resisting further traumatization of individuals is one of the pieces that we'll focus on more specifically today. So just a little note here, if you're familiar with the TIP, you've probably seen these many times, so I'm not going to go into them in great detail, but there are 10 implementation domains that you can see on the left side of your screen that range from governance and leadership, so really acknowledging, who's making the decisions in your organization, the characteristics and qualities of the leadership, their support for their staff, all the way down to, physical environments, policy, cross-sector collaboration, down into financing and evaluation. SAMHSA does love their principles, or its principles, and so those are kind of critically important to the conversations around trauma-informed care, and those are safety, trustworthiness, and transparency, peer support, collaboration, mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. So one of the things I wanted to acknowledge also is that 10 implementation domains are quite a lot. And so agencies who have attempted to implement trauma-informed care typically focus most of their energy on items 6 and 7. So they're really thinking about, if you're providing services to vulnerable populations, that you're really focused on screening, assessment, treatment services. Like, that is what you're focused on. And then you're also focused on your workforce. You want to make sure that they are adequately trained, that you're monitoring them and the quality of work that they do, and that you're really focused on even things like minimizing turnover of staff and addressing those kinds of issues. That leaves out when agencies have little, oftentimes are faced with strapped for resources, strapped for personnel. And so it makes sense that you really would put a lot of your energy in these 2 domains. However, if you want to be successful, you really have to be looking at how are you adequately addressing all of these 10 domains. So over the years, we have seen some kind of good news and some bad news around TIC implementation. Specifically, one of the things that I find so helpful about the work that's been done thus far is that it is based on principles, which means that the practice of those principles can be flexibly applied, and it's not necessarily written to be a kind of cookie cutter approach. It really is encouraging organizations to look at what makes sense for the population that you're serving and the characteristics of the staff that are serving folks. There have also been complications in measuring fidelity to the TIC model. I read recently, I think it just came out in October of 2019. There's been a review of instruments that measure trauma-informed care, and I think they did a systematic review of 49 of them, and very few of the ones that are out there right now have been studied for validity and reliability, and we'll talk more about that. Of course, TIC has also converged with a great attention and focus, as you all know, around adverse childhood experiences. And there have been, with that increased focus, some concerns about the instruments, the ACE questionnaire validity, and potentially provocation around physiological dysregulation. So when you're asking really, people to be really vulnerable and answer some hard questions, there can be physiological responses to that, as you all might imagine. And so there is some recent work around how can we perhaps insert some questions in between the traditional kind of 10 item questionnaire that would help to alleviate or mitigate any potential for that dysregulation for the people who are taking that survey. And when you're talking about people who have experienced trauma and really vulnerable populations, I think that this is a really worthwhile area to pursue. Lastly, there has been an increase with TIC implementation, also an increase in understanding and acknowledging and really starting to talk about having some concerns for a deficit focused or kind of pathology focus. People are more than their trauma. And so there's definitely some resources I would recommend on this. Just off the top of my head, the Trouble with Trauma is a great article. I think it came out in 2017. If you haven't seen that, I definitely recommend that, and want to make sure that that if you're pursuing this work, you're also looking at the other side of it and kind of minimizing that bandwagon effect. So in a nutshell, trauma-informed care is complex. There's so many different resources. Some of them are similar, some of them are different. They kind of say the same thing in a lot of different ways, and all of those different ways may not be relevant to your type of organization. You may have a smaller organization, you may have a giant organization. So it's a lot of material to move through, and so that is why over the last several years, the College of Social Work has been working with the ACE Nashville Trauma-Informed Care Work Group in trying to figure out how can we put the work that they've done in the hands of all of you. And so we will talk about what the roadmap to resilience is and how it really can be a true roadmap for your organization and not just simply a kind of, just another toolkit that may sit on the shelf. So a little bit, just a brief overview about Resilient Tennessee and kind of what it is and how it relates to the roadmap to resilience is Resilient Tennessee is a name for the partnership between the College of Social Work and ACE Nashville. And for those of you who may not be aware of what ACE Nashville is, it's a countywide collective impact initiative here in Davidson County to prevent and mitigate adverse childhood experiences. In 2019, fiscal year 2019, the Department of Children's Services, Building Strong Brains, funded the Roadmap to Resilience model, or the R2R, which we're conceptualizing as really your GPS to organizational trauma resilience. The purpose of that one-year grant was to transition the written templates into an online platform to be launched last year, which we are still working on that. And the thing here is that the ACE Nashville Trauma-Informed Care Work Group had been working on these templates as a collective, a number of practitioners who had a lot of experience in this area. And I think all in all, it took about 3 years for those templates to be written and published under the prior BSB funding in fiscal year 2018. And so this is not some kind of overnight thing that people have, put together. This was a lot of work over many, many, many hours by many dedicated professionals. So the main purpose of this last round of funding was to move those written templates into an online platform, and I'll talk more about that in a second. The second overarching goal was to develop sector-specific materials, because we really wanted to not just move what existed prior to this funding, online. We wanted to enhance it and expand it. So we did a pretty intensive review of those templates, and decided, how can we expand it, what needed to be tweaked, what maybe could be, what maybe was a little redundant, and also, can we start to think about it providing resources for individual sectors like education or medical settings. So we did do that over the past year. We kind of did as much as our time and funding allowed for that. And then lastly, one thing that I felt very strongly as a kind of putting on the research hat around all of this work is that we really wanted to do our due diligence and make sure that whatever work that we put out there had been really reviewed and really thought through and was grounded in really basically had a really strong theoretical foundation. And so the research that we've done, which again I'll talk more about in a minute, the focus of that was to validate an instrument to assess fidelity to the roadmap to resilience at the organizational level and create a non-proprietary instrument for use by the general public. So we sort of saw the value of creating something that was somewhat specialized to the R2R model itself, but that also would be of benefit to agencies outside of Tennessee who may not be engaging in the online tool, but that they wanted to, use it in their own agencies. And so that assessment is in its kind of last stages and is now known as the Organizational Trauma Resilience Assessment. So what is the roadmap to resilience? I keep on saying that. And so I'll first say that what it is not a clearinghouse of static information. It is not a toolkit on a shelf in an online format. It is a dynamic platform designed for robust user engagement by providing a step-by-step roadmap for creating meaningful and sustained organizational change. So a lot of thought went into online learning, and we used our resources and expertise in that area at the college to really kind of put all of this into action. So just a little bit about the 4 R's, because you're going to see these 4 R's repeated, as you can see in the graphic on the right. The 4 R's of trauma resilient organizations have been adapted. This framework has been adapted from that kind of original SAMHSA Tip 57 work. And I'll highlight here, I've already talked about how when you're implementing trauma-informed care, you want to focus on, you as an organization, you want to realize the impact of toxic stress and the path for recovery. You want to recognize problems within the organizational environment as symptoms of traumatic stress. You want to, and you want to respond. There's kind of no point in recognizing you have an issue if you're not going to do your part in trying to respond to that issue. And so want to make sure that agencies are responding by integrating knowledge of toxic stress and resilience into everyday practices, policies, and procedures. And then lastly, and this really is a bit of a theoretical leap and a practice leap from the original SAMHSA work, is that we want to build organizational resilience, and specifically organizational trauma resilience. And we want to do that, and we believe that it's achieved or developed when the implementation of trauma-informed systems results in the prevention and mitigation of toxic stress for both employees and service recipients, resulting in not just improved outcomes for individuals, but also improved outcomes for the organization. And I will say that even though I feel like we're going on the 3rd decade now, or almost over the 4th decade of trauma-informed care at the practice level, we still don't necessarily have widespread research around how the implementation of TIC practices results in improved outcomes at the individual level. And so that's something that we believe will happen if you do this, but I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that there's still a dearth of literature and articles that really that research that really focuses on that piece. So I'm hopeful that this work will kind of push that piece forward. So I've already kind of mentioned the 6 TIC principles, and the way that the Roadmap to Resilience expands on that framework And this is all, again, done through the research of many practitioners over the last several years, is that it's really imperative that if you're going to attempt to implement trauma-informed care, that there is a strong focus on wellness. And so I'm just going to highlight that here. So instead of thinking about the 6 principles of trauma-informed care, we are going to focus on the 7 principles of organizational trauma resilience. And so that 7th principle of wellness is one of the foundational components of the roadmap to resilience, and all of the information that is on there is really geared to, it addresses all the areas that you see here, but it has a special focus on wellness, which really it is about focusing on the wellness of your staff and how that translates to the wellness of your organization and the overall wellness of your service recipients. You know, we can't care for others without first investing in ourselves. And so we want to focus on the parallel processes within the organization. So whatever type of privileges and services and support that you're providing for your service recipients, you're also providing for your staff. And whatever you're providing for your staff, you're also providing for those people that you're serving. And also maintaining that staff need to have voice and choice and autonomy in the way that they determine what is helpful for them. So this is a piece of this puzzle that has not been completely, I would say, researched and implemented in a large way, in the way that some of these other areas, like such as peer support, has some research behind it. A little bit about some anticipated benefits for staff of trauma-resilient organizations. Some of those benefits could look like improved self-care and job satisfaction, greater sense of occupational safety through increased agency support, so making sure that we're preventing things like secondary traumatic stress or burnout, an open forum for using voice to affect change in the agency. This has a lot to do with transparent communication and kind of ongoing continuous quality improvement efforts that agencies can employ, but also making sure that there's this reciprocal or kind of bidirectional relationship to the information that you're collecting from both clients and staff, that you're using that to inform agency policy and change, and that it's all a very transparent process. We're also focused on increasing staff knowledge and skills surrounding trauma response, and exposure to and trauma exposure response. And as I mentioned, those kind of improved health outcomes through those parallel processes that we talked about. So if you're providing support for those clients, you're making sure that how are you supporting your staff. And one of the things that's kind of funny to me about trauma-informed care is that it's also just common sense in a way. It's really just good business practice when you really kind of strip all the jargon away. Unfortunately, though, the way that over the years that some agencies have operated, we haven't realized that kind of basic, good business practices in terms of the way that we treat our employees. And certainly that's complicated by many different factors, including things like insurance. But, it's one of those things that we hope that you will have a lot of improved staff outcomes. And again, hopefully some improved client level outcomes as well. So just a little bit about what is actually included. So when I say roadmap to resilience, this is really the slide I want you to focus on. And so what you see on the left side of your screen is the templates for resilient organizations. This is the cover page of the original templates that were published in June 2018 under the prior BSB funding. And it is if anybody has seen it, it is like a 2 to 3 inch thick document or work product that is exceptional and includes a lot of different information around training, and really focuses on, how do you create productivity through safe, stable, and nurturing environments, really focusing on those organizational processes that we've been talking about. So what the R2R has done is it's pulled those templates and it's expanded them by providing affordable online access, simplified step-by-step processes, planning guides, recorded trainings, handouts and resources, access to that organizational assessment I mentioned that will include a personalized report, and policy overlays. And for those of you who are the policy folks on the call, this is an extraordinary resource that has been painstakingly developed over the last few years, and there are a number of policy overlays. And so what I mean by that is it looks like analyzing your policies, every single one of them: onboarding, hiring and firing, ongoing training, supporting your staff. There's just so many HR policies in there. I think there's about 30 in total that we have that are where we have a review on each one, where it gives you examples of this is what it looks like to be trauma-informed, and this is what this policy looks like when it's not. And so it gives you kind of case studies and tips and recommendations for how to analyze each of your policies. There's also access to mentorship if you need some support and consultation and help through if you want to implement the Roadmap to Resilience, and that mentorship will be accessed through the 8th Nashville Trauma-Informed Care Work Group, even if you are outside of Davidson County. We're also hoping to provide access to an evaluation team through SWRPs, and again, kind of support from the Trauma-Informed Care Work Group. And also, I want to acknowledge that we have thought a lot about how to embed, we want to walk the talk here, and so we've made sure to embed some ongoing continuous quality improvement processes so that as more folks go through this, put this model into practice, that we're getting real-time and ongoing data from folks in a very non-burdensome way. So that we'll be able to make some course corrections and revisions as, if we realize something's kind of redundant or it's just not working out. And so we've made sure to do that. So just a little bit, I've been talking about steps here. So I want to kind of talk about what does that actually look like in action? So I want to drill down to some detail here. So when you are going through the online system, it's basically consists of 4, not really modules because they're more in depth than that, but it's 4 different steps or layers that you could think about. And the first step is mirrors that the opportunity to realize, basically where are you on this journey. And one of the main features of this step is that your organization will need to create a group of champions. That's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's the group of people that will be responsible for ushering this organizational change initiative through to completion. So you want to make sure that those people are really taken care of, that they're really supported, they have the financing and resources that they need in order to provide that leadership within your organization. We definitely recommend that you have all levels of your organization represented on that champions group if possible, but knowing that it's probably going to be a smaller group of 2 to 5, sometimes 8 or so people who are really leading the charge on this. And one note, a little bit about a detail about accessing the system. We envision that it's really only that champions group that will be the members of your organization that will access this online system. So it's not like if you have 250 employees, that all 250 employees are going to be asked to access the system. It's only going to be focused on the people inside your agency that are going to be facilitating this change and leading this change. So we want to support those champions first and foremost, and so we're going to be having information that will help to increase their skills and how to facilitate tough conversations. This is, how do you create buy-in? If you've got an old guard and new guard type of dynamic within your agency, how are you going to navigate that? So we provide some resources that look at that. We also want to, of course, increase awareness in all staff around about ACEs. So Jen Drake Croft was generous enough to record a 2-hour BSB training. It was sort of specialized for the roadmap, and so we have that available to everyone. There's also a number of trainings around trauma-informed principles and also an introduction to trauma-resilient organizations, which is really focused on increasing knowledge of helpful tips on trauma-responsive cultures and practices. Step 2 is about recognition and recognizing, where are you on this journey? You've kind of put your toe in the water, you've done some initial trainings, people are kind of ready to go. Okay, so now what? Well, you're really focusing here on increasing that buy-in through a large kickoff with a focus on staff wellness. As I mentioned, that really is a key kind of cornerstone of this work. And by having a large event, it can take many forms. You are really walking the talk, and you're saying our organization is serious about this, and we're dedicating time and staff and resources to this work. We're going to be focusing on developing an understanding of what staff need to stay healthy and feel safe, and that safety is around, of course, emotional and physical safety. I want to lay a foundation again for that culture of wellness, gain an understanding of how well the organization is already doing and being trauma informed and responsive. And how we do that is through a number of assessments. The main one that I've talked about that we have validated is the organizational trauma resilience assessment. However, there are other assessments around staff readiness and professional quality of life scale. Like there's a number of different assessments that we would recommend in addition to the OTRA. And then lastly, the last piece of going through this step is that you're going to use those assessment results to develop a strategic action plan to address those identified areas of need. And this part is critical, and there are action planning guides embedded in the R2R to help you on this piece. The third step is to respond. As I mentioned before, we want to make sure that if you recognize something, that you are able to respond to it. And we know that everybody is at different kind of levels of skill, have different resources around this. But our hope is that the detail of that organizational assessment will help you be strategic about your action planning, knowing that you can't, quote unquote, you have to take the bite of the elephant, kind of one bite at a time. And so we know that you can't do everything all at once. So you need to be strategic about, which things you focus on first and how you want to dedicate your potentially limited resources. So those assessments will really help you do that. So you want to make sure that when you get to the place of kind of putting that action plan into action, that you're encouraging staff and celebrating successes and providing support. You definitely don't want people to be, that champions group to be on an island, of some kind, that they don't have the support that they need. Another feature of this layer is a focus on developing leadership. So there are some specific trainings around that and kind of managing change. We're going to focus on gaining knowledge of different empowering communication techniques, because that's a big piece of this. And these things that I've mentioned too are also separate the R2R model from some of the other existing trauma-informed toolkits and kind of information packages that are out there. We're also going to increase awareness of, like I said, different communication styles, but also increase skills in dealing with challenging conversations. And lastly, as I mentioned, there's a big focus on the policy overlays to discover if you have any adjustments that need to be made. You may realize that you're actually doing really well in this area, but it's not something that you're going to know until you really go through and look at those one by one. And lastly, I mentioned that we really want to move beyond just responding to something to really fostering a culture of trauma resilience inside your agency. And so one of the first things when you get to this step that you will do is you will reassess. We want to be data-driven, evidence-informed, and we want to look at what type of progress have you made. Sometimes things get a little better or a little worse before they get better. So this is a great time to pause and take stock of all of the successes that you've had, celebrate your achievements, but also really focus on taking the exact same assessment you did in step 2 to see how far you've come. And when you do that, it's going to provide you more information to help guide your planning and sustainability efforts moving forward. Definitely are going to, prepare to continue working on the results of that OTRA instrument, and see what areas may need improvement. You're going to gain knowledge of resources that provide specific trainings and connect to a larger peer group of organizations. Peer support is not just for individual consumers or service recipients. It really is about peer support among leadership and other agencies that can help you along the way. There will also be a focus on sustainability planning, and there's going to be some specific tools I'll put in to this phase around that. And then lastly, of course, we really need to make sure that your agency has a focus on continuous quality improvement efforts and that they're embedded in all of your organizational policies and practices. So I'm doing pretty good on time, which is good because this is the part where I get really even more excited than I am right now. So I'm going to talk about some new research on assessing fidelity to trauma-informed care principles within an organization. So for those of you who've been doing this work for a long, long time, you will recognize this definition of human resilience. And I just wanted to put this up to kind of bring us all to the same place around an understanding of human resilience, and that kind of one definition of that is that it's positive adaptation in the face of risk or adversity and a capacity of a dynamic system to withstand or recover from disturbance. And so one of the things about this that I think of is that it really is focused on adapting and adapting to adversity and withstanding some type of negative change and able to recover, from whatever that disturbance is. The next definition I want to focus on in the resilience literature is actually organizational resilience. And this kind of takes a whole other view of resilience, although it's very similar, but this is from the organizational resilience literature, which is many, many, many decades old at this point, and that is the ability of an organization to anticipate, prepare for, respond, and adapt to incremental change and sudden disruptions in order to survive and prosper. So when you put both of these definitions next to each other, one is talking about a person and one is talking about an entity, an organization, yet they sound very similar. They're all about kind of how do you prepare for a disturbance? How do you bounce back? But when you look at this, and specifically this graphic, you can see things like supply chain resilience. This is really, organizational resilience, for those who don't know, it's really completely born out of the business world, but the theoretical foundation of it is, does overlap with the human resilience literature also. So they've sort of both grown over the last 40 years or so, or longer than that, over time. So one of the things when we were doing this work, Dr. Brown and I especially, we were really like, where does this fit? Where does the roadmap to resilience fit in this larger picture? I mean, it's very, trauma-informed care is complex on its own, but if you really want to focus on building an entirely new system and really making sure that you're expanding the knowledge base and the theoretical base for what we're doing, we have to pause and look at, it's not just about changing the word re-traumatization to resilience. We want to make sure that we've really done our due diligence in thinking about what does this really mean? What is the theoretical basis for the actions that we're recommending? And where does this all fit? Because when you take a step back, in terms of the literature and the theoretical base, in a bit of a trauma-informed care is in a bit of a gray area because you're kind of applying these the human resilience definition to an entity. And so, and then in some cases bringing in all of the research from organizational resilience. So, but then that's really its own thing that's focused on businesses and not, and specifically businesses that are not human service organizations. So it really is in this kind of odd sort of gray area. And so we wanted to make sure that we were thinking through all of those things and trying to figure out where does it really fit. And so what we came up with is this idea of organizational trauma resilience. And there's a lot of stuff on this slide. And please know that this is in process and will be changed and will be going out for publication later this year. But where we are right now is thinking about organizational trauma resilience sort of nested in this idea of, kind of where do we fit? Like, so what is this it says epistemological pluralism of organizational trauma resilience. Basically, where does this all come from? It comes from a lot of different places. And when you look at the 4 waves of resilience research, specifically around human resilience, organizational trauma resilience fits very nicely, really in all of them, and specifically kind of an offshoot of the second and third waves that are looking at things like obviously trauma-informed care and prevention science, how to actually intervene or create resilience when it's not likely to occur naturally. It's taking in concepts from organizational psychology and human and organizational resilience, as I've mentioned, and even potentially can the 4th wave of research is posited to be really about this kind of the next wave of epigenetic research and really looking at gene-environment interaction. And so when you think about organizations as an environment and knowing that stress has a physiological is a physiological response to a stimuli, there's, and we have people with those physiological, responses being triggered through your work. There's a lot to discover. There's a lot to kind of unpack with all of this, and so we're hoping in our second publication to really bring this to life in more detail. Just to kind of few little pieces here about that I wanted to focus on with the instrument that we have validated. I'm going to kind of skip through this because I've sort of covered most of it. But what this tool does, as I said, is it evaluates where you are and it helps to provide a guide to where you need to go. It definitely, as I said, should be used alongside other tools. It specifically works to assess fidelity to those original TIC principles. And this particular assessment, which there are other assessments that do this, some of which are proprietary, but it really focuses on the overall experiences of staff within an agency. And we originally piloted 65 items, did some convergent validity, and wound up with 45 validated items that line up under 5 overarching dimensions of organizational trauma resilience. Those 5 dimensions will look very familiar, but these are the dimensions under which you will get, if you go through this and you take this assessment, that your organization will be able to action plan based on these different dimensions. So you may realize, for example, that you're doing really well in trauma responsive services, which is dimension 4, around access to screening and assessment, or and trauma specific services, but you're maybe not doing so well on fostering a culture of trust and support. You may realize that your leadership or your practices are really not felt to be engendering trust and support among your employees. Definitely, it's going to focus on practices of inclusivity, safety, and wellness, and collaboration, empowerment, and training and sustaining trauma responsiveness. As I mentioned, that one of the main features of the 4th step of resilience is going to focus on how do you actually sustain all of these efforts over time, and it is going to focus on things like financing and evaluation. So in closing, and before I skip to just the last little piece here about next steps, I love this quote. If anybody's read Atomic Habits by James Clear, this will be very familiar to you. But as a systems person, this makes a whole lot of sense to me, and I love thinking about this work in terms of really thinking about your systems. Every aspect of what you're doing as an organization is it really is its own system. And so, you can set a goal and you can make an action plan, but progress is really measured by how effective the systems are that you put in place. And so you really don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And what I love about the R2R is it really tries to provide a roadmap to improving all of those systems that are so critical for helping both staff and people that you serve. So something to think about if you're kind of still on the fence, or if you're really excited about this and want to get going, kind of leaning into this kind of roadmap metaphor a little bit more, thinking about identifying next steps on your journey. I recommend that you kind of check yourself. Where are you? Where are you in your organization? How committed are you? How committed is your leadership? Is there anything holding you back? And also, what's pushing you forward? Because that's something you can lean into when times get a little bumpy. Also recommend that you check your tank. Who's with you? Who's going to help keep you going when the going gets bumpy? You want to definitely check your brakes. And sometimes I like that Marcus Aurelius quote that says, "What stands in the way becomes the way." And this is what I think about here is really understanding like what is in the way. Where are those roadblocks? Are they factors? Are they people? What are those obstacles? Also, who's got the wheel? The people who have the wheel should really be your on your champions team, and those champions need to be awake and alert and well taken care of, and no distracted driving on this journey. Those folks are critical to successful change. And also, lastly, what's in the trunk? What resources in the form of human capital, financial capital, and physical resources do you have to support your journey? And also, what excess baggage are you carrying that you can get rid of in order to make room for more resources? And so this is something that could be helpful to think about. And if you don't know all the answers to these questions, take some time over the next week or two and just take stock of where you are, and it can potentially help you make a plan for moving forward. In terms of accessing the R2R, the next step for you, if you have not done so already, I know I've already gotten a couple, please visit the Trauma-Informed and Responsive website on the college's page, which is listed here, which I believe we also provided a link to, and go ahead and download that interest form and email it to me. And then when we are ready to go live, which is anticipated in spring or summer, hopefully sooner rather than later, there's still a few moving pieces we have to figure out. I will host a longer informational webinar, and we'll be able to walk you through exactly how to access the system. And then, of course, we are in the process of looking for and screening folks across the state who want to be mentors. So if you feel like you've kind of been there, done that, and feel like you know how to implement trauma-informed care, we would love to hear from you. And so please go ahead and email asashevilletic@gmail.com, and, of course, share this information with your colleagues. I'm going to go ahead and stop there.
All right.
Questions?
Suki, I cannot believe how much information you got through in like 42 minutes. That was pretty impressive. Wow, that is great. So we had a couple questions come in, and please feel free to be typing your questions in the chat box, and I can read them aloud for Suki. The first question that we had come in was, how long has the R2R model been around?
It is just emerging. We created it. We meaning the Resilient Tennessee Partnership and the ACE National Trauma-Informed Care Work Group. So it was originally published in June of 2008. Then in June 2019, we kind of finalized what we were putting into that. And then since June of last year, I've been continuing to work with the work group on figuring out essentially, because we've had to change, I can get into a lot of detail here, but I won't. We've had to change systems, and so we have a much better online platform now, but we have to figure out the kind of complicated issues around payment structures and financing, and what does that look like, and what is the relationship between the university, the college, and the work group.
That's awesome. Okay. So there was an article that you referenced at the beginning of the presentation, and they were wondering if you might provide a citation to that article.
Sure. Can you clarify which one? That was the Trouble with Trauma article?
Yes.
Or the one about the systematic review of all the assessment tools?
How about you include both? Yeah, that would be great. Okay.
I like that Trouble with Trauma article because it was very concise and easy to read. Is that
awesome?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Well, I will make sure that when I send it out with the recording and the PDF version of the slides, that that I will include those citations.
Mm-hmm.
The next question that we've had come in is, what is your vision for R2R and how it will support the work, hold on one second, the Building Strong Brains work in Tennessee?
I have a slide for that. So great. Thank you for that question. One of the things that we've talked about, and it's been, and I'll admit, it's been a steady tension, but just in a good way, not in a bad way, in a good way, around how do we leverage all of the existing resources in Tennessee that we can, and then kind of pave that path forward in a seamless way. And so we are in the process of, and it's already sort of done, but there will be a space on BSB's base camp, which those of you are probably pretty familiar with, that if you join the R2R family and you go through this process, you will have access to that space on base camp, which will be monitored by members of the ACE Nashville Trauma-Informed Care Work Group that will help provide that ongoing peer support that is so important, that kind of goes beyond the just like the, we've got some focus groups that we recorded and that are really special that we included in the system, but that we want to make that interaction more live and more kind of real time. And so so that's one concrete way that we're going to be involved in BSB moving forward. Is really, that's a great, base camp is such a great resource, but it's not going to have all the resources that are on R2R. It's really going to be more about that ongoing communication, saying, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Is anybody else? And so you'll be able to have that kind of back and forth chat function, and then folks to help kind of point you in a good direction as issues come up.
Perfect. This is somewhat related, but the question is the 2018 templates for resilient organizations, the one that was produced by ACE Nashville, is it available online?
If that's what the R2R has done, is to move those templates into an online format. Right now, the original templates, there are, if you wanted to get a hard copy of those, I believe Alex Betts still has some available from what was printed before in 2018. So if you just kind of wanted to get something in your hands like right now, but just know that the trainings included in there have been expanded, and some things have been amended, and basically it's a new, better, shinier version of what we've created online. And so the R2R really is the online version of what used to be referred to as the template.
So no other questions, but I have a comment, and just having been a part of, how you all have designed this and in conversations with you, Suki, I'm just so excited about the opportunity for folks to engage in an online self-paced learning, online learning management platform. And I just love that you have these various videos and ways of engaging people. I think it appeals to lots and lots of learners. I think you touched on this in your presentation, but do you want to talk a little bit more about like some of the coffee chats and stuff like that you've developed for this?
Yes, and one of the original visions when we were first, when the college was first developing the FY19 BSB grant application, is we felt really strongly about kind of moving this just from, ACE Nashville membership access to the templates to really pushing it out statewide, and online is really the platform in which you can spread it to far and wide. And we also recognize that provided an opportunity for engagement with resources that people may not have access to. So if you're in a really rural area in Tennessee, you may not have other peers in local organizations that are also working on this. And so you may feel isolated and like you need some additional support. And so one of the resources that we included to do that is, thinking about, how often, you just like gone to a meeting with a colleague and then say, hey, let's go get some coffee and let's talk about what just happened here. Let's talk about that training we just went to, and everything. And it's all very organic, and it just happens naturally. And that's how you build relationships. But if you're in more isolated areas where that you may be the only entity that's providing this type of resource in your 3-county region. You may not have that type of opportunity. And so we recorded a couple of focus groups specifically for to kind of address that piece. We kind of call it, a little bit of a coffee talk, and really got a group of experts together to and just really film some just really candid conversations around leadership practices for doing this work, lessons learned, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, cultivating buy-in and challenges around that. And so we tried to kind of, get at some of those core issues that can help with organizational change initiatives.
Awesome. So I've typed this in the chat box, but this is last call for questions. If you've got them, type them in. And I will make another comment as a person who is really overseeing a lot of this Building Strong Brains training for trainers work. What I frequently hear from our trainers is that, our BSB curriculum is really the first step to raising some of that awareness. And then you get people who are quite excited and they're ready to jump in, including our trainers themselves. They're like, I've been training on this a while. I'm ready to translate this more effectively into policies, practices, all the 4 Ps that we talk about. And so I'm just so excited that there is this well thought out, well researched resource that can help people take that next step. And answer that question. So as you're going out there and conducting trainings, you can share this resource with people who are excited and want to know what's next, and you can even share with them some of the research that is cited here if they're interested in going to some of the original sources. But when they're ready to get started, I think that this is the place. All right. I don't see any more questions. Suki, any last or parting words?
I just want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to learn more about the R2R, and just please go ahead and fill out that interest form if you are ready, because that's the place that I'm going to look to when I post information about when the site goes live, and I really want to get information in your hands as quickly as possible. So look forward to seeing some of those come in, and I'm really excited to get this off the ground with your help. So thank you.
Awesome. Woohoo! And quick addition, Wallace Dixon posted that if you would like to go ahead and not have to wait for the citation on the Trouble with Trauma article, you can download it for free if you use Google Scholar. So if you Google that on Google Scholar, it will pop up and you can download it. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And thank you again, Suki. And I look forward to seeing how this is used in your various organizations. The recording will be posted to our YouTube page, but I will also send it out via email. So everybody have a great day. Bye.